What is up, everybody? This is a new edition of the 40 Club here on InsideCarolina.com. I'm Joey Powell. He's Tommy Ashley. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Tommy, a new edition of the 40 Club, and we have got who I'd like to think is, amongst other things, not just having the best parking spot on campus in Chapel Hill, but the first fan, a guy that has a really unique perspective. We're talking today with Chancellor Kevin Guskiewicz. Tommy, are you prepared? Are you on your A game? Did you take a shower today?
I did. I took one this morning. I don't usually get a little nervous doing these podcasts. Been doing them for a long time, but we appreciate the big man on campus, the legitimate big man on campus, for joining us. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kevin G.
Yeah, Chancellor was telling us just before we got started here that he gets called a number of things, and we were trying to figure out how to address him for this episode of the 40 Club on Inside Carolina. And he said Kevin G is pretty common around campus. I don't know that I'm young or hip enough to still, to be cool to use that colloquialism with him, but we appreciate you making time, Kevin. It's first time I think that we've had a sitting chancellor, at least to my knowledge, since Tommy and I have been doing these. So appreciate you making time for us.
Great. Thanks for having me, Joe and Tommy. It's an honor to be on the show on a Friday with a Carolina blue sky out there.
Yeah, you've got a pretty strong window, I'm sure, looking out over the beautiful quad there and from South Building. Let's start here. We were talking before this. We've talked about the concept of this show has been kind of a ripoff of Mac Brown's 40-year decision. So we've called this kind of the 40 Club. While you didn't attend North Carolina, you've been here for 27 years, right? I would love to know from your perspective, what brought you to UNC?
We almost didn't get here. My wife and I were set to stay in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'd been offered a job there at UVA right out of my doctoral program, but I had one interview left, came down to Chapel Hill for an interview. Amy wasn't real excited that I was making that trip because she wanted to just stay up there in Charlottesville. But I fell in love with the campus on a 2-day interview, drove back up to Charlottesville. On my way back up there, she called this is back in 1995, and she said, "How did it go?" I said, It went great. It just feels right. And the phones went dead. It was like one of those Verizon commercials. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And she said, "No, I heard you. We'll talk about it when you get home." Lo and behold, 27 years later, here we are. And we both have fallen in love with Chapel Hill years ago and raised our children here. And we have 2 Carolina graduates of our own. But I've had an opportunity to view this magical place through the lens of a parent, of a dean, of a department chair, a young faculty member, center director, and it's a magical place, and we're just so happy to be here.
So I got to be honest, this is probably not breaking news to you, but you're the first sports medicine researcher or neuroscientist that we've had here on the show. How did you get so drawn to TBI, CTE, all of the concussion type work that you made your career on? How did you get into that? Where did that interest start, and how did you make that connection from being an undergrad and eventually getting into where this was your life's blood?
Yeah, well, I was working on my master's degree back in about 1989 to 1992 at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was at that time graduate assistant athletic trainer for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is I'm a lifelong Steelers fan. I grew up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania.
Rolling Rock.
Arnold Palmer, and the one that most people don't know is Mr. Rogers, all from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. But lifelong Steelers fan. I had a chance to work there for 2.5, 3 years during Chuck Noll's last 3 seasons, and I was curious. It seemed odd that we'd be sending players back into the game back in those back in the late 80s, early 90s with some would argue a suspected concussion, maybe a concussion after they had cleared, and but yet would hold somebody out with an ankle injury for 10 days. And so I was curious, and so I had a chance to leave the Steelers and go to the University of Virginia for my PhD, and began working on this complex injury. Many people at that time called it an invisible injury, and I'm proud to say that, gosh, 33, 35 years later, because of a lot of the work we've been able to do here at Carolina, it's no longer described as an invisible injury, one that we've got better tools in our toolbox to be able to evaluate because of the work we've done here in our research center.
Chancellor, staying on this concussion deal, Carolina's been at the forefront of that a lot. Just sort of describe your role in making sure Carolina's leading the pack there, and then what you've seen as far as the advancements on campus, the football program. I mean, soccer has a ton of concussion injuries and things. How has your role been in making sure the student athletes at North Carolina are taken care of?
Yeah, no, a great question. I have to credit Mac Brown in some ways with this. When I got here in '95, I wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, build some better tools to put in our toolbox to evaluate concussion. And Carolina was a place, Mac was the head coach at that time and left a few years later to go to Texas. But I had to get the buy-in from our sports medicine staff, our coaches here, to allow our student athletes to participate in research studies and to be study subjects for as we develop our own concussion protocol here. We put in place arguably probably the first and best concussion baseline testing program in the country that then was adopted by the NCAA, later the NFL. And we've been, adjusting it, tweaking it along the way. But because we had willing coaches and athletic directors and a sports medicine team here at Carolina back in the mid to late '90s, where no other university in the country would touch this, we were bold and we said, we're going to do this. And so I really credit this community here taking this seriously. And because of it, I think we've led the country in this space, and others have adopted a lot of what we've done. And we were one of the only few places in the country that put accelerometers in the helmets of our football players. We're still doing that today as part of a large scale study. And we're continuing to learn from that. It's the reason why the NFL changed the kickoff rule back in 2011. Was because of our research here with accelerometers and helmets.
Do you feel like, it seems like it's certainly getting a lot of press. We saw Tua last week for the Miami Dolphins. We saw Nyheim Hines last night for the state guy for the Colts. Do you feel like it's getting that there are more concussions, or we're just learning more about them and paying more attention? Because like you mentioned, back in the day, guys would knock themselves silly, come off, shake it off, and go right back in. Nowadays, it's more prominent in the press, the issues that they're having. Do you feel like it's getting worse, or it's just being, acknowledged more these days?
Yeah, I don't think there are, and I've said this repeatedly, and I think most of the experts in this space would agree, there are no more concussions occurring today than there was a decade or 2 decades ago. We have just gotten a whole lot better at picking them up, at diagnosing them. Some of that came just through the education about concussion and educating athletes about the signs and symptoms and the importance of reporting concussions. We've done this at just about every level with all the state concussion laws that have been put in place over the past 12 years, and this has been elevated at every level, the NCAA, the NFL, NHL. And so we've removed some of the guesswork, and we've basically, again, because of some of the tools that we've built to diagnose that acute concussion. So we're just picking them up, and people are sitting out much longer to recover, which has reduced the number of repeat concussions that we've seen. And I believe the NFL reported just recently that it's the last year was the fewest number of concussions in the past, I think, 2 decades in terms of the number of concussions that we've seen. So I think we're getting better at this.
I want to ask a question that I think it's a little philosophical, and I think you probably are one of the few people that has the unique perspective to be able to try to thread this needle. When you're watching sports, there's a certain vibe or a spirit of the game, right? Then there's also this other perspective that these are real human beings playing in this game that could have long-term major impacts and debilitating consequences on their lives, playing a game that gives the audience enjoyment. How do you kind of toe that line between keeping the sport that it's intended to be, but also trying to make sure we're protecting the players and the human beings that are seeing their lives just cut dramatically short, or the quality of their lives just eroded on the back end? How do you fall, or where do you fall there, and how do you approach that?
I'm conflicted often, quite honestly, and It's because I love sport. I think sport, we live in a sport crazed society. And I say that in a positive way. I think there's so much that sport brings to society all three of my sons played Pop Warner football, and one of them played right up through high school. And a lot of my friends at that time were like, "Are you crazy? Like, why would you let your kid play football? You're studying this, you see the potential dangers." And I said, because sport, if you teach it right and you protect kids and not just with, you gotta have the best equipment, but you also have to be teaching them how to protect themselves, and teaching them how to block and tackle. And this is just football. And I would say sport in general it's important. It teaches leadership skills and builds character and teaches teamwork and collaboration that is going to serve these kids throughout their lives. So I'm doing everything, and I know I speak for many around the country that do research in this area. This is about protecting the health and safety of athletes, young or old, so that they can have the benefits that sport brings out. And it provides, I love watching sports. I think like you, I think it's part of our society, a part of our daily lives. And so again, I am conflicted at times, but I think that it's never been safer, quite honestly, to play high school and collegiate sport. And I think a lot of that's because we've allowed the science to help inform rules changes and policy changes. And so I'm a big fan of keeping the research and science at the forefront of keeping our athletes safe.
Appreciate that answer. Want to try to push that a little further, but kind of go towards your role in leading the university. There's always seemingly been a divide in the rhetoric between academia and athletics. And that's always the thing when I think about somebody sitting in a chancellor seat, especially now. That's probably one of the hardest things to do, is kind of keep those two things working in a symbiotic relationship so that everybody wins. When you consider, sports as kind of the front porch of the university sometimes, and it can be one of the biggest fundraisers in a billion-dollar world for research, for student scholarship, what have you. What's your perspective on that? How do you drive that? Because again, you're in the top seat. How do you make those things coexist and keep people from seeing academics versus athletics and recognizing that everybody can win there?
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I talk about excellence in the classroom, excellence on our playing fields, and I talk all the time about our world-class faculty. We've been a top 5 public research university for 27 consecutive years. U.S. News and World Report has ranked us. We're ranked #1 among all publics in terms of best value, meaning we combines excellence and affordability. It's something that we are really proud of here at Carolina. And I talk about what those world-class faculty do for our students as they graduate and go on to become the next generation of leaders, civic leaders. Well, I would say that our world-class coaches do the same thing for our student athletes. We have 800 student athletes at Carolina, 28 teams, and those coaches serve as lifelong mentors for those student athletes. And so it's part of our DNA at Carolina. And I think that yeah, you might say it's the front porch. I would argue and push back a little bit. It's maybe what the average person might read because they turn to the sports page first. But I'm trying to focus on, we are a research and innovation powerhouse here. We bring in $1.2 billion a year in research. Some of that research is what I described earlier. It's research grants that come from the Department of Defense, the NIH, the NFL, the NCAA, to help protect student athletes and our military service members, because a lot of our concussion research, what we've learned in our student athletes is now benefiting our service members. So again, it's part of our DNA. I'm repeating myself now.
Let me ask you a question, and it's certainly relevant to our listeners and readers and YouTube watchers and all that, is when the NCAA was in town, you weren't the chancellor, but you were around. How was that from your perspective? Both a personal, this is my university, this is troubling, versus a leader at the university. How was that balance when all that was going down back in 2010-ish?
And you're talking just more specific. You're talking about the NCAA, the allegations against the university.
Yes, sir. When the NCAA came calling, dealing with the allegations, how was that from your standpoint? At least observing it, dealing with it. We know what the final result was, but during it, how was that on campus from a person in your seat?
So I was a department chair and a faculty member, and I've been a faculty member for 27 years. I was department chair at that time of exercise and sports science, and it certainly caught the attention of all of us in terms of faculty. And I think there were, regardless of the outcome, I think there were some additional measures put in place as a result of that was really important. Some compliance functions that we now are continuing, 10 years later, to be sure that that questions such as that were raised never come about again, that our faculty understand the importance of this, that student athletes, our coaches, we came together as a community, made some really good hires as a result of that in terms of how we're advising and managing student athletes. So regardless of the outcome, we learned from it. We got better at some of those compliance functions and ensuring that excellence in athletics was intersecting, as I said earlier, with excellence on our playing fields, in our courts, swimming, pools and tracks and et cetera. So we're all in a better place, and I think it helped. A lot of other universities were paying attention and have employed some of the same measures we put in place as a result.
Yeah, I appreciate your candidness with that answer. I mean, it was a difficult time for folks, and it was certainly an opportunity to get better. And you said the university did. Let me stay like in the NCAA realm, but in terms of expansion, what is your role with the university in expansion talks, whether it's Big Ten, SEC, whatever, the conference expansion? And do you see all this talk about expansion and super conferences or whatever? Do you see it having an effect at large on the university itself outside of the academic programs?
So it's, the landscape's changing. The intercollegiate athletics landscape is changing. And so we have to be forward looking. We have to be, positioning as a chancellor of an outstanding university that, again, prides itself in having a strong athletics program that many people count on us to have. We have to be forward looking. And so we are, every options on the table as we look at this. A lot of it comes down to, trying to improve our media deal. That's, as you well know, the media sort of is has helped to change the landscape in terms of the payout per institution that is built into these contracts that each of the conferences has. So we are being responsible as we're looking at this. And I think I'm proud to be one of the, we're one of 15 schools, 14 and a half, perhaps, if you count Notre Dame as sort of in football. We're trying really hard to make it a solid 15. That would change a lot as well. But we're one of the original members of the ACC, and we're proud of that. And I want to do everything to try to strengthen the ACC, and that's where my focus is.
I think one of the things that the average fan or subscriber assumes is that, it's just easy to bounce around from conference to conference. Like, you see the moves that are happening with UCLA and Southern Cal, you see Texas and Oklahoma. North Carolina is obviously a pretty desirable brand, but also a very desirable institution from an academic standpoint. That's the way it seems on the surface. In your seat, you see how really complicated this whole thing is. Can you, I guess, give me one of the misnomers or misunderstandings that fans have, or the average university supporter or the average faculty member might have? Like, how big of a deal is moving conferences? Like, how big of a deal is changing from, being in the ACC or maybe the ACC expanding, or God forbid UNC goes somewhere else? Can you give kind of a scale as to what size we're talking when we talking about decisions that big? How much does it affect the university?
So, I mean, this could be an hour and a half long conversation. Yeah, there's a lot of opinions on this, believe me. I mean, since June 30th, when I guess UCLA and USC announced that they were moving to the Big Ten, we've spent a lot of time talking about this. I've had a lot of phone calls, a lot of opinions pushed in my direction, and I'm probably no different than half a dozen other ACC presidents or chancellors, and it's not easy to make a move. And the first question is, we have to think about the student athlete, and I think that's what has gotten lost in a lot of this, and that's something I care deeply about. Yes, it's also about improving our media deal and ensuring that we are competitive in terms of how we're able to put those dollars back into the to the university's infrastructure and the athletics department, and so to support the campus and our student athletes. And so we're really careful as we're looking at all of this and trying to work with the ACC conference. I will tell you, Jim Phillips, our relatively new commissioner, has been working tirelessly at this. I'm a believer in Jim. And I know he's committed to doing everything possible to improve that media deal that we have, so that each of the member institutions can maintain its competitiveness. So, but it's not easy. I mean, the grant of rights, that in itself is a whole long conversation, but we are bound to that grant of rights up through that current deal through 2036. I mean, if this was really easy to do, don't you think that Texas and Oklahoma would have jumped immediately to the SEC when they made that decision? But they're waiting 2 years until their media deal and grant of rights is expired, so that they can move without paying exit fees and losing the media rights that now I guess the Big 12 currently holds the rights to for those two schools.
And again, this isn't me trying to pin you down, but perfect world, would you rather see North Carolina stay in the ACC and to see the ACC survive the seismic shifts?
Yes, I've said that repeatedly, that we were one of the original members of the ACC, and my goal would be that we have a stronger ACC. And again, we've got 15 really strong schools that compete at a high level, and we want to make sure that we can continue to do that.
So you mentioned earlier, you talked about how great some of the coaches that you've been able to work with are. I think North Carolina fans and our subscribers recognize, how blessed they've been with, Roy Williams, Mac Brown, now Hubert Davis, but also you look at Karen Shelton, you look at what's been done with Anson Dorrance and the women's soccer program. There's just so much good that comes out of UNC athletics. What has your relationship been when you've had a chance to work with some of those folks, specifically, whether it's in your research, whether it's been as chancellor? Can you talk about some of those relationships and maybe not just bragging on those people, but how has your relationships with those made your job easier, or made for benefits for the university down the line?
Yeah. Well, what I failed to mention earlier in the conversation, when I came to Carolina, I still wanted to be clinically active. And so I was brought into an academic faculty position, but wanted to still work in the sports medicine space. So I got here in '95 at the same time Jenny Levy, at that time, Jenny Slinglove was her name. Jenny Levy, our 3-time national champion women's lacrosse coach. Jenny had just been hired at the same time. We both started on July 1st, 1995, and she was charged to take a club lacrosse team and turn it into a varsity team. And so they said, why don't you work with Jenny? And so I became Jenny's athletic trainer.
That's awesome.
Did that for the first 4 years I was here at Carolina. Jenny took that what was a club team to the Final Four 2 of the first 3 years. It was incredible. And here we are. I mean, she's now, after 26, 27 years, 3 national championships. I don't even know how many ACC championships, coach of the year. And I have had a great relationship with her and with Anson and with Karen Shelton. And our tennis coaches. I mean, we, just last year, 2 national titles, obviously the one in women's lacrosse and in women's tennis, the ITA indoor. Obviously what Hubert was able to do last year in his first year. I've developed a great relationship with Coach Davis, and I still call on Coach Williams. I just had a conversation with Coach Williams the other day, getting some advice from him on an issue. He has stayed connected. And so again, these are world-class coaches that love this place. And that's just why anytime you start talking about, potential changes to the conference, you really have to think about the entire program, all 28 sports, and what that means for those student athletes. I know that at the end of the day, everybody says it comes down to the revenue that football generates and men's basketball. But we have incredible coaches. Courtney Bankhart with our women's basketball team, she's taken that program to new heights, and I think you're going to see them. That's going to be fun to watch over the next few years.
Chancellor, when you talk about all those coaches, they seem to all get along too. That's not the case at every other university. How does that, as being the head guy there, how does that make you personally feel to see that these folks get along, whether it's Anson Dorrance, who's clearly the best to ever do it in that realm, on down to Levy and Banghart, and Banghart's relatively still new, but they all seem to mesh so well. How pleasing is that to the eye of the Chancellor?
I love it. And, and that speaks to the job that Bubba Cunningham does. I think we have the best athletics director in the country. He is, one of the things that Bubba did was, he came in, it's probably, I'm guessing here, we're probably talking about maybe 11, 12 years ago. And, he's coming in from the outside. Dick Bedore is a great friend of mine, and Dickie did a great job running the program, for many years. And Dickie ran it sort of a family. It was a family-run business. Bubba kept the family while still creating a little bit more of a business approach to running the department, because we had facilities that needed to be upgraded, and he's done a great job of doing that and finding a way to create the revenue to do that. A lot of philanthropy around it. I mean, we have an amazing donor base that believes in Carolina, the Rams Club, and John Montgomery and the work that he does, and others. But Bubba Cunningham does a great job, and I'll tell you, Anson Dorrance. You mentioned Anson. I mean, he's been around a long time. 3 years ago, I asked Anson to be our keynote speaker for our new student convocation. This is, we gather everybody in Carmichael Arena, and we have one person, I get up there and do the little Tar Heel rah rah, welcome to Carolina, but then I need a keynote speaker. I'm thinking, who better than Anson Dorrance to give a pre-game pep talk to 4,500 new students, and he was incredible. So it is a family atmosphere. They all get along, and they got to share some facilities, and that's not always easy to do, but they find a way to do it. So I'm proud of them.
Yeah, I was there from 89 to 93, and Anson Dorrance never lost a game, and they won 4 national titles. So I put those 4 years at Carolina up against anybody's. My son's currently there, and he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand how big a deal that
tell
was.
him you're going to get him several national championships. What year is your son in?
But he is a sophomore at Carolina now.
Great. Well, we're going to make sure he gets some. We're going to make sure he gets several national championships.
Yeah, Hubert almost came through last year, and he was ready on Franklin Street. But he's had a blast there. And he's in sports administration now. He certainly understands the role of sport.
That's a great program. And just so you know, the convocation this year, in front of those almost 5,000 first-year students, and we moved it over to the Smith Center for convocation. I promised them there as we wrapped up the evening that Coach Davis had promised me they'd get to rush Franklin Street 2 or 3 times this year. Hubert said, "Thanks a lot. No pressure now."
Well, what's crazy about that, and this is just me going long-winded, is he stayed home. We all went to the Final Four as a family and to cover it or whatever. He stayed home just so he could rush Franklin Street, and they got to do that on that Saturday night. Let me switch gears and talk more specifically about the players themselves. What's your take on NIL? I think them getting paid was a long time coming, probably should have happened a long time ago. But you, in your position, name, image, and likeness, what's your overall take on it, and how do you see it going? I feel like it needs to be tweaked a little bit. It's a little different, and it's a little sort of Wild West now. But what's your take in your position?
Yeah, so if you look back, I mean, for the majority of the NCAA's history, the governing body enforced rules prohibiting college athletes from being paid for endorsements, for signing autographs, et cetera. And Wow, I mean, hasn't that changed? I mean, I remember my first meeting of the ACC presidents back in March of 2019. We sat around a table talking about how how are we going to protect amateurism in intercollegiate athletics? And that was just 3.5 years ago. And boy, that ship has sailed. New state laws and movements across the country have led to, really the enactment of name, image, and likeness. That all changed in July of 2021 when student athletes officially began signing NIL deals. And so it has changed. I'm conflicted on it, quite honestly. And I think what I have to do is this, as I said, that ship has sailed. So we've got to now best position ourselves and make sure our student athletes can be focused on both the academics and excelling in their sport. But I'm proud of the fact that we were the first school in the nation to sign a group licensing agreement with student athletes in partnership with the Brander Group. And I think our focus continues to be on education and opportunities around this emerging world of college athletics.
I think one of the things that North Carolina has long been known for, and you mentioned, being out front and signing with Brander. If you think about, how Coach Smith and Charles Scott helped to integrate ACC athletics, if you think about the work that you've done specifically with, brain injury and CTE and how that's being impacted by sport, North Carolina as a university, sometimes with the athletic department, but more importantly as a university entity, has always been a leader. And I think the university has always prided itself on that. I would ask you, what do you see right now as we sit here in 2022? What's the biggest threat to North Carolina continuing to be a leader?
I do think that, we need to be sure that, I think it's around name, image, and likeness. I mean, I really think we are going to have to be sure because it's here and it's here to stay. And I want to. You mentioned earlier about we're in the ACC. The ACC is regarded as excellence in athletics and academics, and we're proud of that. And that's why I believe strongly that this is the right place for us. It's one of several reasons, but I think that is threatened with the way that student athletes are in the transfer portal. I worry about that, and graduation rates of student athletes, because we're graded on that, and that's really important. And so when athletes are coming and going, and you got name, image, and likeness, and they're looking for better deals, I mean, I worry that it's becoming a free agency type model, and so I'm concerned about it. And some might say, well, that's only in 2 or 3 sports, but no, I think you're going to see a proliferation of this out across many sports. We have 28 sports here, and I want to support all those student athletes. And I think the way in which NIL is potentially going to create further challenges for us with Title IX, because we have to keep our eye on that. Bubba Cunningham and I are in tune on that, and we talk regularly about it. So I've given you a whole lot there in answering your question, but we have to continue to lead, and I want to be sure that we are the intersection of excellence in the classroom and excellence on the playing field. It remains a top priority for us.
Let me jump in here. You speaking about leadership and all that. I want to ask you personally. You came in, I think, took over December 19, and then COVID hits.
Welcome to the chair, Chancellor.
What is a chancellor of a state university, one of the best, thinking when all that starts going down in March of 2020?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, my motto in life has been, easy is boring. And I had no idea what I was saying or talking about, because this created a whole new environment for our campus. I've used the sport analogy often, as I do, and I said we were really playing with an untested playbook, sort of like an athletics team, preparing a whole week, in a football team and preparing all week to play Syracuse, and we find out that the team that shows up on Saturday is Florida State, and that's what that's what we felt like. I think we nobody knew how to, what to do with this situation. We had never thought about going entirely remote, but on March 11th of 2020, I pulled our leadership team together, chair of the faculty, secretary of the faculty, and here in the South Building. And I said, we're going to need to go entirely remote for some period of time. And the irony was, we were all thinking, okay, this might be 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, who would have ever imagined? Chair of the faculty looked at me like I had 6 eyes, and they're like, he's like, entirely remote. Most of our faculty have never taught an online class. But I was really proud of the way that we build out a roadmap, a plan that we had to tweak along the way. But at that time, only about 15% of our faculty had ever taught an online class.
Wow. And
we gave them about 8 days to pivot to teach entirely online. But they responded. And I said, that's what great global public research universities do. We teach society how to adapt. And we had to adapt ourselves. And here we are, 2.5 years later, 2 years later, in a much better place than where we were then.
Still doing Zooms, which is the irony of it all, is that this is the easy way to do these type interviews. Let me ask you one more question in that regard. Walking around campus, March, that summer of 2020, it kind of brought everything into perspective, right? The fleeting nature of what we all do. What was that like, having Chapel Hill virtually empty when it's usually so vibrant and so such the place to be as UNC, as Woody Durham used to say?
Yeah, it was tough. I love, every day I look out this window at the old well, and there's always people out there snapping photographs, and people were happy, and that's the way it is today. As I said, Carolina blue sky out there too. But that changed rapidly. And while a lot of students still, while we had to, we did still have about maybe 3,500 students still living in our residence halls. That was down from, we typically are in the, closer to 10,000 living in those residence halls. We still had a lot of students uptown. It just was not the same. Our classrooms were empty. We still kept our research going though, which again, something I'm proud of. We never shut the university down, and we plowed through it. But we're in a much better place today. And, I think back to that game. I remember standing there at a game. It was against Syracuse, football game with about, 1,000 people in this thing, a 60,000 seat stadium. It just was really odd. But again, we're in a much, much better place today.
Well, Chancellor, last one for you, and hopefully this will be this will be at least last one for me. This will be a little bit of fun for you. You mentioned when we started, that you are a sports fan, longtime Pittsburgh Steelers fan. But I want to ask you, what's it like being the first fan at the University of North Carolina? So many sports, so many successful programs. Do you ever get a chance to just kind of be a fan? I think about the NCAA tournament run. Did you get a chance to enjoy that as a fan, or is it just too immersed in you as Chancellor to be able to kind of rip that hat off? Yeah, Joe, I'm a huge sports fan, and I've raised my children to be big fans, and so I do enjoy it. I usually at a game this past week against Virginia Tech was a lot of fun. I make sure that I can watch the fourth quarter. I'm usually up there in the Chancellor's box or over in the zone or down on the field for a while, and I love seeing the energy inside of a stadium. And so I love being around people that are enjoying that game day experience. And, but my goal is that I can always be in my seat with my, next to Amy or the boys or my daughter Tessa, and, to enjoy watching some of it, be a fan for part of it. But I'm often working, and I say working, it's a fun kind of work. Same thing at basketball. The run down in New Orleans with the Final Four was incredible. Something I'll never forget. Just being with the students. I spent a ton of time with the students down there in New Orleans, and we came up just a little bit short, but we're going to go get it this year.
Last question for me. One bit of advice you'd give to either incoming students at Carolina, or anybody around UNC, what would that be?
I just sat in my office here with a prospective student and their family yesterday, and I talk often about this is a magical place with so many opportunities, and you can make it feel as small as you want it to feel. Your son maybe experienced this, or as large as you want it to feel. I mean, it can have the feel of a small liberal arts college, or it can feel like a large, one of those Big Ten schools, if that's what you need. And sometimes students, they'll shift what they feel they need at some point their sophomore, junior year, and start taking classes in some of our professional schools. But I think you have to explore options. I love the student that comes in and says, I have no idea what I want to study, but I'm going to figure that out. And then they take 2 or 3 semesters and they explore a couple of different classes and some different majors. We have a brand new general education curriculum that we just launched in this year that exposes students to different majors, teaching students how we solve big problems. It's called Ideas, Information, and Inquiry course. And I think it's going to be a game changer for us. It's one more example of how Carolina leads. We're bold, both through our athletics endeavors, but also through our curriculum. And we're proud of that.
Chancellor Kevin Guskiewicz, we appreciate you taking time for us today on the 40 Club here on InsideCarolina.com. Appreciate your candor. We think, I think you could have dodged a couple of these questions, and I think you landed the plane really well. And appreciate your honesty with us. And hopefully things keep going well. Hopefully you've gotten through leading the university through an unprecedented pandemic. Hopefully the next couple of years will be easy for you.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, guys, for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and happy to jump on with you anytime. Go Heal.
Yes, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate
That's Chancellor Kevin Guskiewicz. Thanks, Chancellor.
Take care.
Let's do a Johnny T read. What do you think?
That's all. That's your wheelhouse, brother.
You think Chancellor Guskiewicz has ever been in a Johnny T shirt?
I bet you he has.
He could stand out in front of his office. He could stand out in front of his office and probably throw a lacrosse ball and hit the back of the Johnny T-shirt store. Johnny T-shirt, big supporters of Inside Carolina, big supporters of the UNC community. As we just talked to the head of the UNC community, Johnny T-shirt supports that. Alumni owned, locally owned and operated. We're thankful for them. Premium subscribers who are probably listening to this podcast know that you get an extra 10% off the top of their already amazing prices. Chancellor talked about it multiple times. UNC's athletic department sports 28 different programs. Well, Johnny T-shirt's probably got a shirt or some gear for all 28 of those. Hit them up, johnnytshirt.com, or right there on East Franklin Street. We appreciate you being a part of this episode of the 40 Club. Appreciate Chancellor Kevin Guskiewicz stopping in, talking about a lot of stuff, man. We covered a lot of topics. I hope it was informative and enlightening. I love hearing somebody that sits at the big chair of anything, but hearing his perspective and his expertise in a lot of these things was really informative, but quite fascinating in some places. How about you?
Yeah, same. And it was interesting, his discussions there with the NCAA matters and the expansion and all that. I mean, NCAA comes to town, what do? You do better. You get better in certain forms. And then talking about expansion, I'll be honest, he's similar to a lot of us older, and I've called myself old before on these shows and got fussed at by some of the real old guys. We'll say the wise guys, but the ACC was a big deal, and being a founding member, he hit on that. So, do I personally believe that it can withstand all the changes? Not really. I don't know. But he's a belief that a strong ACC is where Carolina needs to be. I don't necessarily disagree. I just don't know if we can get to the strong ACC part. But certainly a fascinating interview, and his willingness to come on and never once said, you can't ask me about this or you can't ask me about that. And, folks talk about the tough questions or whatever, but he answers everything. And he's so into UNC. Is fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons we wanted to have him here on the 40 Club is, he's not a Tar Heel born, but he's absolutely a Tar Heel bred. And I mean, if you hear the answers and the passion, you can't sit in the seat that he has and not have passion for the university in every single crevice of the university. You've got to understand it. And I can't imagine, the burden that sits on shoulders like that and what he has to deal with on a regular basis. But like you said, Tommy, he didn't give us any parameters. He told us ahead of time, hey, yeah, I'll come on and do it. Knew we were going to ask him some stuff that may not have been comfortable, but I think he addressed them pretty well. And hopefully folks that listen to this show or watch this show today have come to appreciate kind of just what comes with sitting at the big chair for a university and a brand as big as North Carolina's is. I couldn't do it, wouldn't want to do it, but definitely have an appreciation for what he does, and certainly appreciate Chancellor Kevin Guskiewicz joining us today. What else you got, man, before we get out of here?
Not much. This will we recorded this in full transparency. We recorded this on October the 7th. You're probably listening to it during Carolina's bye week. I'm still sure his view out of that window today is as good as it was on October 7th. But yeah, he has. If Carolina fans or sports followers ever doubted whether or not their chancellor was on their side, and there was a lot of that doubt.
There's
during the
there's been
NCAA
some in the
system.
past that weren't.
Yeah, and so it appears that Carolina is in good hands. And his discussion of all the other 28 teams. Think about that, man. We cover football, basketball, and baseball to an extent.
Mhm.
And then the message boards have threads for the other Olympic sports and the women's basketball team. But 28. I challenge anybody watching this to write down the 28 teams that Carolina has right
Without
now.
cheating.
Without cheating. And Kevin G he said I could call him that. So
He did say that. You're right.
And probably shouldn't have, but it is what it is. But he has to manage all of them. Football is the bellwether. Basketball, of course, is what it is. But he's got to manage all of them, and he seems to do it with a hint of sports guy, and that's not always been the case.
And it's Bubba Cunningham's purview, but it's obvious that Chancellor Guskiewicz knows what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's all you could ask for with a guy at the tippy top of the food chain. And I do appreciate him talking about getting to be a fan, because that's where we all have a commonality, right? We all want to see Carolina do well. Inside Carolina does better when North Carolina's athletic teams are doing well. Fans like it better when North Carolina's teams are doing well. And and he gave a little bit of that too, as to how that fits within a multi-billion-dollar research and academic setting. Which again, just bigger picture stuff than my small brain will usually allow me to consider. But appreciate Chancellor Guskiewicz joining us. Tommy, thanks for making time, man. Always love doing these. Hopefully we'll have some more coming up relatively soon, but we appreciate it. Appreciate Johnny T-Shirt sponsoring. Appreciate John Siegley for his production expertise in making this happen. But for Tommy Ashley, for Chancellor Kevin Guskiewicz, I'm just Joey Powell. We'll catch you next time here on the 40 Club on InsideCarolina.com. Take it easy.